Welcome to the Scale the Chaos podcast, where we talk all things contributing to your business dysfunction. I'm your host, Rhonda Lee, a certified Six Sigma Black Belt dedicated to helping organizations break free from the chaos. In each episode, I bring on industry experts to share their insights, experiences, and practical advice on navigating the challenges of modern business. Today's episode is part one of my conversation with today's expert guest. Be sure to check out the second part of our conversation in the next Scale the Chaos podcast episode. Today's guest is certified speaking professional McCullough, a renowned business leader and expert in high-performance leadership strategies. She brings over 2 decades of experience in helping businesses thrive through improved emotional intelligence and cultural transformation with her unique insights into how emotional intelligence shapes company culture and influences organizational chaos. I'm excited to have her on to share her expertise on creating resilient, high-performing teams that can effectively scale past dysfunction. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start off by having you give us a little bit of background on the journey of how you became passionate about studying and shaping company culture with emotional intelligence.
I knew when the switch happened. I've always loved success principles, high performance, success books, personal development. The joke is that when I was 12 years old, I begged my mother for a Franklin Day planner. And I'm sure she laughed behind her back, but could she really fault giving me something that would be useful and helpful?
Yeah.
So I've always been a success junkie. I read personal development books before it was cool. So I was really always passionate about what makes things work. How do you do things faster? How can you master your time and also master your mindset? When I first started speaking, I was speaking on productivity because that's really what I had mastered. Companies were excited to bring me in. I wrote a book in 2015 called The Make It Happen Blueprint. It was published in 2017 by a publisher. And so people were bringing me in because they're like, help my teams be productive. What was interesting is I kept noticing that productivity training wasn't moving the needle. It wasn't making people shift. So I'm talking to these organizations about productivity and really noticing that if your team is burnt out, if they're tired, if they're struggling with their own challenges, if they don't know how to deal with their micro stressors and macro stressors in their life, it doesn't matter how many productivity trainings you give them, they won't be able to apply it to productivity. And then I asked one of my friends / clients who had brought me in, can I come in and teach your team about emotional intelligence? And he said, I can't afford that. And I was like, let me try. It's worth it, I promise. And 6 months later, he called me back and he said, Michelle, you're right. Teaching my team about emotional intelligence and happiness has helped them to be more productive than productivity training ever was. So I've been operating under that assumption for the last decade and working with organizations who are interested in trying something new. If they've tried leadership training and productivity training, now we're trying it from a different approach to see how to truly get employee engagement in a new way.
Yeah, it really is that foundation. It doesn't matter how much productivity training they do. If they're not happy, they're not going to internalize that training. So let's talk about how you define a healthy company culture in practical terms, in terms of the normal business setting.
You can tell you have a normal or a healthy, I think normal is the wrong word, but we define culture in a lot of different ways. But ultimately, a healthy corporate culture is a resilient corporate culture because the constant that we can expect is that change will come, change will happen, change will affect us in a lot of different ways, not just the macro organizational level, but on an individual level, you'll also go through changes. So you've got an organization that has multiple moving parts, even at a small company, and then you magnify that for large companies. And the corporate cultures that are able to handle change and be resilient to that are the ones who are doing the best.
One of the resistance to this resilience training that I have come across is business leaders, because it comes from the top down. Business leaders, when they think about resilience, they only think about adversity that the employees are experiencing on a personal level. That does affect how these individual employees show up at work. But what they don't take into consideration is the changes and the things that employees are experiencing in the workplace. They also need to develop resilience to that. So it's leadership realizing that there is actual adversity in the workplace that needs to be addressed.
Correct.
So let's
Correct.
talk a little bit about how poor company culture contributes to organizational chaos. I know you've had some research. We're just going
Yes.
to dive right in.
I love that you brought this up because when you are a high performance and happiness speaker, you often get companies who will say things like, I can invest in soft skills. I don't want my team to do soft skills. I want to give them hard skills, sales training,
Mhm,
all those other
mhm,
pieces. I really felt like they needed to see the research to back it up and to see what is actually happening in those organizations. So we conducted a study which we commissioned through the Center for Generational Kinetics out of Texas. And we asked working Americans. I specifically wanted people who are engaged in the work, not that because I don't care about people who aren't working, but I wanted to really see how it was affecting corporate culture. So we asked everything about their own personal happiness and resilience, but then we also asked questions about leadership and their cultures and how it was affecting them. 70% of working Americans said that if their boss was more resilient, it would help them to be more resilient, which helps us identify that there is a challenge with the way the employee boss relationship works, but also the culture around leaders in general, that they just expect people to fall in line, do what they want them
mhm,
to do.
mhm.
Now we know that isn't really the case. But the big clincher for us was that 90% of working Americans said that if they were more resilient and they were happier, they would do better in every single workplace situation that we tested. They would be more productive, they'd be better team players, more creative, more innovative, better able to work with their management or be capable for management. What we found is that not only does it affect your culture, but they know it affects their culture. As much as bosses and leaders don't want to be the ones that are in the high performance and
Mhm.
happiness business, the reality is if they're not getting that education from anywhere else, they need to get it from the organization.
Let's talk a little bit more specifically about the things that leaders are doing that are contributing to the silos and the dysfunction and the I don't know that we want to classify it as unhappy. No, let's classify it. Let's call it at what it is. Because
Sure.
the unhappiness in the workplace.
A couple things that stand out first that if we can look at first will make a big difference in what leaders are doing to contribute to poor workplace culture and causing some of that chaos. Number one is old patterns.
Mhm,
And they can be the patterns that they've done for a long time and they think they work and they're scared to change because they are patterned themselves, they're systematic themselves, and they're scared about what change might affect. But there's also internal patterns that happen, like the person before them who had this position either did it one way or a different way, and they're either trying to be the same or trying to be different. And so it's just really interesting to see how patterns, both internally and externally, affect the workplace because we know psychologically that leaders have this mindset that the baseline is control. And they don't say this, but that's what they're thinking. I've got to be in control of the situation. I need to be in control of my team. I need to be in control of the output. I need to be in control of conversations. I need to be in control of the narrative. So even if they're not saying that's their fear, because being out of control means that they will lose their job or that the team won't produce or that they'll create even some more chaos. So the patterns that they use to try to keep themselves safe in a lot of cases can be harmful. There is a mindset that creates a pattern that says, if I am not the one in charge and I don't establish that control, then my team is going to take control and I have to make them know that I am the leader. While it is important to establish not a hierarchy, but a chain of command that gets you all the way up to the CEO, that doesn't mean that you can't collaborate more with your team, have better communication with your team, or find ways to be a little bit more on their level. Some leaders are doing a great job of this. So I'm not trying to say all leaders
mhm,
aren't, but in the research, what we asked is, what do you want from a boss? And the reality is that the older generations will say things like stability
mhm.
because that's what they need, especially in the final years and final generations of their career. But these newer generations, younger millennials, Gen Y and Gen Z, they're all asking for support. They're asking for connection. They're asking for collaboration. They want an entirely different set of principles than the previous generation. So if you're stuck in a pattern of providing stability, that's not going to work for all of your people. You have to figure out how to connect. One of the findings was that people at every generation do want more support from their bosses, but not just at the office, in their personal lives as well. That will take an entirely new set of patterns, a new set of structure that helps you ask someone, hey, what are you working on? And they say marathon, and you remember, how's marathon training going? When is the marathon coming? And you're caring not just about the milestones that they hit in the office, but their personal milestones as well. And those are just a couple of examples. We could talk for hours about what leaders do to contribute to chaos, but the patterns and the mindset are the first step in establishing a new connection and finding new ways for employee engagement.
Yeah, I can definitely see how a leader who is being held responsible for the outcomes of the team, why they would then think they needed to control the behavior or the performance of the team. I think that's a natural inclination, changing that mindset of letting go. Let's talk about what behaviors are crucial for creating a healthy culture.
This is another conversation where I could talk about this for 8 hours. Here is the short answer to
Okay.
that. You only have a culture if you have a set of values. And the reality is that you have a culture whether you have a set of values that
Mhm.
you agree with or not. If you don't have the values in the organization that you want to be having, then it's time to have conversations about what those values are or revisiting conversations about what those values should be. Then it's getting specific and saying, do we want a corporate culture where people feel like it's safe to talk and create a culture of communication? Then, if that's the case, you can't just say, we have a culture where communication is open and healthy. You
Mhm.
have to train for it. You need
Yes.
to train. What does healthy communication look like? If you want to have an environment where you want better team building, you can't just say team building is a value. You
Mhm.
have to teach what team building is. Give them team building activities, give them
Yes.
opportunities to create. Too often, we are seeing the C suite say, here's what we value, and they're expecting people to run with it. Instead, they're interpreting that value in their own way. And
Mhm.
so, my number one suggestion is that whenever you're looking at changing the culture in any way, establish the value that it's created by, and then create training around it so that there is a common language through all the levels of the organization and that there's no guesswork or interpretation about what you mean by those values. And that's the only way change can happen. Too often we see people write a mission statement and say, here's what we're doing, instead of really understanding what does that look like? How are we implementing it our organization? What does it mean to us? What does it mean to you? How can we work together? Creating that culture really is not just intentional, but ongoing. It's not something you can do once and be done. You have to
Mhm.
keep committed to that process and that education over time.
Yeah, and to your point about how each employee is left to interpret, I worked for a company where they said that we were all family and
Mhm.
we treated each other like family. That meant different things to different people because there were lots of people saying, I don't want anybody here treating me the same way my family treats me. I come to
Correct.
work to get away from my family. You want to make sure that you're teaching what does that mean? Or maybe do we have values that could mean different things to different people?
Correct.
So let's talk about maybe there's somebody that's listening, they aren't sure that their culture is in chaos. So let's talk about those sure tell signs that the company's culture is creating some of the chaos and the dysfunction.
First place to look is engagement and production. Do you have the kind of output from your people that you expect or that should be expected? To me, that is a very layered approach. It's
Yeah.
one thing to look at your organization and say, okay, I feel like my team is not engaged. I feel like my company is not engaged. I feel like we're not producing the way that we should be producing. The goal is more production. But
Yeah.
the challenge is when you're looking at that culture and trying to figure out what is working, what's not working, the engagement piece could be that you have to look around and say, do I have the right job descriptions? Does
Mhm.
everyone know exactly what their job is? The second one is, do we have the right people in the right seats? That requires like an organizational shift. And you know what? That's really hard and tricky, and
Mhm.
no one wants to do that. But if you really want to see and affect change, you have to recognize that there's going to be some difficult decisions that need to happen. Productivity is way more than the jobs and the to-do list that you give people. It's making sure that you have the right people doing those jobs. If you don't currently have that as a litmus test for what is working or what isn't working, then it's important to do the research and ask. That's one reason why we institute assessments. We'll come into organizations and we'll do an employee engagement assessment that includes both a survey, interviews, conversations to be able to say, here's really what's happening within in your team. This group we feel like is doing a fair amount of quiet quitting. This group is
Mhm.
doing a fair amount of underproduction. This group is totally disorganized and dysfunctional and needs reorganization. So it gives people an opportunity to see, here's where we're noticing the chaos and here's where we're noticing what's not getting done. The second that I think that you should check on is not just engagement, but retention. Do you have a lot of turnover? Are you constantly finding some positions or some teams that you're replacing regularly? In which case, that's a conversation for, hey, we need to reevaluate the leadership team. We need to look at our company values. We need to make sure that the job description is right. So I think employee engagement and employee retention rates are a great place to start. But of course, we analyze sales, we analyze profit and loss statements.
Mhm.
But if you start to look at it from a people first level, you'll make different decisions on the profit level.
It's really easy for leaders to say, we want them to be more productive. We want them to be more engaged. But a lot of them don't necessarily know what that even means. What are the expectations? We want them to do more. What's involved in transforming a culture that is lacking in the emotional intelligence leadership?
So my first recommendation is some kind of training, and training on two levels. Training the entire organization and saying, here is some common languaging we can use around emotional intelligence
Mhm.
so that we can have better conversations and that you can feel comfortable getting your job done at work or whatever that looks like. A second level of training for leaders only, where leaders are able to have a set of tools that can help build the emotional intelligence in their organizations. They want to talk about it. So even if you don't feel like your team is equipped to teach it, either bring someone in externally and allow them to teach it, or create conversations around books, podcasts, other organizations that you know and trust. You can create a book club. Everyone is reading this book this month. And then we're going to meet in groups and do a lunch and learn and talk about it. Or here's a series of podcast episodes that we think are great. Watch them and talk about them. And you'll start to see how they're all in it together and they understand what is healthy and what is good rather than this one person who overshares and this person who undershares. And you might not get a change in sharing, but at least you'll feel like they're on the same playing field because they have that common languaging and conversation.
So, when you go in to work with these organizations, how long does it typically take for this type of transformation to occur?
I recommend that organizations are committed for 3+ months. That plus is open ended. But I think you have to show and establish that the change is long lasting rather than just a newsletter. In some organizations, it might take 6 months. In other organizations, it might take 12 months. It definitely takes more than just one email or one event or one conversation to see that it works. The people who have been with you for a long time know that change is coming, know that changes are always going to come, but they're just going to wait for the next change to happen and wait for the next newfangled contraption. When I was working for an international technology company, I was on the sales floor with 85 other inside sales reps. We had external sales reps that were our counterparts in the field. We knew that they were going to change the sales structure every single year. And we would wait for them. It would take 2 or 3 months for the new sales program, the new sales process, the new sales system to become in place. We spent so much time not being productive because
Mhm.
they were reevaluating every time. I don't want any organization to have that type of environment where people feel like it's just going to change every single year, or it's going to change every quarter, or it's going to change every other time. This is establishing a pattern and a commitment to change that
Mhm.
takes longer than a normal cycle. And so if you can get through a couple of seasons where different changes are happening for people both personally and professionally, then you'll start to see that value around emotional intelligence take root and really make a difference.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us today, Michelle. This has been fascinating. You and I are soul sisters because we talk about and do a lot of similar things.
Thanks for having me.
That wraps up this episode of Scale the Chaos. A big thank you to our guests for sharing their expertise and actionable insights. If you found value in today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your network. Your support helps us bring more conversations like this to business leaders like you. To find out more on how you can scale your chaos, you can go to my website at www.scalethechaos.com or connect with me, Rhonda Lee, that's Lee spelled LEA on LinkedIn. Join us in our next podcast episode for part 2 of today's conversation as we continue to tackle the challenges of organizational dysfunction and help you transform chaos into scalable success. Until then, stay focused, stay inspired, and let's scale the chaos together.